The light in the grand conclave chamber was ancient. A soft, silver luminescence filtered through crystalline walls that had borne witness to the rise and fall of stellar empires. It was a light that held the memory of eons, yet today it seemed thin, brittle, casting long, fearful shadows from the dais where the high luminary Vorlag of the Cathar presided. His own multifaceted form, a towering lattice of living crystal, refracted the chamber's glow into 1,000 anxious splinters. Silence, a pressure as immense as a collapsing star, filled the space between the delegates. It was a silence born not of peace, but of a shared, unspeakable dread. Data, raw and terrifying, flowed across the holographic sphere at the chamber's heart. It showed a cancerous void spreading through the Typhon expanse, a wound in the fabric of spacetime that devoured light, matter, and meaning. They called it a Cipher 8 incursion, a designation that was clinical and sterile, a desperate attempt to name the unnameable. In truth, it was a predator of realities, a self-replicating storm of paracausal entropy that had resisted every weapon, every strategy the combined might of the conclave had thrown at it. The fleets of the Outer Arm have been neutralized. Vorlag's voice was a low, resonant chime, each syllable vibrating with the weight of galactic history. He did not say destroyed. Neutralized was a more honest word. The ships had not been blown apart. They had been unwritten from existence, their histories and the memories of their crews becoming statistical ghosts that flickered and died in the archives. The Vexian Armada, the Glypton Harmonic Fleet, all have failed. The Cipher 8 continues its advance toward the core worlds. Our models predict systemic collapse within 3 standard cycles. Across the chamber, arch-strategist Xylos of the Vexian Hive, a being of polished chitin and barely suppressed aggression, shifted his massive frame. His mandibles clicked, a sound like shearing metal. Our models are flawed. They are based on conventional physics. This entity does not obey them. It does not conquer, it erases. We fire graviton lances, and it consumes the distortion. We deploy temporal sinks, and it feeds on the paradox. We have thrown the strength of a dozen species at this phantom, and we have only made it stronger. His voice was a rasp, a grinding of stone on stone, filled with the fury of a warrior race that had never known true powerlessness. He gestured a bladed limb toward the holographic sphere where the stain of nothingness grew. This is not a war. It is an extinction. From a suspended orb of swirling, sentient gas, the Glypton cipher spoke, its voice not a sound but a wave of modulated thought that washed over the chamber. The nature of the threat is conceptual. It is a failure of reality itself. To fight it with matter and energy is to feed a fire with star fuel. We require a different solution, a new paradigm. Vorlag's crystalline facets pulsed with a slow, troubled light. We have exhausted all known paradigms, Cipher. The greatest minds of the conclave have found no answer. Our most ancient technologies, our most forbidden sciences, they are all inert before this foe. He paused, the silence stretching taut once more. There is, however, one remaining asset in the Typhon expanse, a vessel. It is human. The name fell into the chamber like a stone into a silent pool, creating ripples of disdain, confusion, and a faint, almost insulting flicker of pity. Humans, the newcomers, the primitives, a species that had only just stumbled onto the galactic stage, their technology a chaotic mishmash of elegant theory and brute force engineering. They were loud, emotionally volatile, and their ships were an affront to any sane design philosophy. Xylos let out a low hiss of contempt. The humans, high luminary, have your logic processors degraded. Their entire fleet is a collection of relics. We have seen their vessels. Fission-powered projectiles, chemical thrusters, they are barely post-industrial. What could they possibly possess that the combined wisdom of 100 elder races does not? He gestured again, this time to a small, isolated data packet on the edge of the main display. A schematic appeared. It was a ship, but it looked more like a piece of space-worn salvage. It was asymmetrical, bulky, its hull a patchwork of alloys with no visible energy shielding, no resonant field emitters, no sign of any advanced technology the conclave would recognize. Its energy signature was laughably low, barely above that of a civilian freighter. The vessel is designated the TCS Vanguard, Vorlag stated, his tone level, betraying none of a growing, irrational instinct he could not explain. It is the only ship of any species within interception range that has not yet been recalled. An interception? Xylos's mandibles clicked faster, a clear sign of agitation. You would send that derelict against a Cipher 8, It's a death sentence, a meaningless one. The humans are a nascent species. They do not comprehend what they would be facing. It would be a cruelty to ask it of them. For all his militaristic fervor, the arch-strategist adhered to a strict code of honor. Wasting lives, even those of a lesser species, was anathema to him. And yet the Glypton cipher's thought voice shimmered. They are still there. They have not fled. The human species has access to our common data network. They have seen the same sensor readings we have. They know what the Cipher 8 is. They know what it has done to our fleets. Why do they remain? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. It was a logical inconsistency that grated on the Cathar, an act of defiance that infuriated the Vexian, and a source of deep curiosity for the Glypton. Humans were a paradox. Their history, as far as the Conclave had been able to piece it together, was a litany of self-inflicted violence and inexplicable altruism. They had nearly annihilated themselves multiple times, yet they had also crossed vast cosmic distances driven by nothing more than a desire to see what was there. Their technology was primitive, yet their theoretical physics was, in some isolated fields, alarmingly advanced. They were a chaotic variable in a galaxy that prized order. Vorlag focused his crystalline mind, trying to grasp the shape of the problem. He had studied the humans more than any other member of the Conclave. He had read their salvaged literary works, listened to their discordant music, and tried to comprehend their philosophies. He saw a species obsessed with concepts of hope and despair, of free will and determinism. They were not logical like the Cathar. They were not driven by instinct like the Vexian. They seemed to operate on a meta-level of narrative, of story. They saw themselves as protagonists in a grand, unfolding drama, and this belief gave them a resilience that was both terrifying and, he had to admit, strangely compelling. "The humans have already been contacted," Vorlag announced, the admission sending another shockwave through the chamber. "The Conclave protocols demanded it, as they are a signatory, however junior, to the Galactic Concordat." Xylos reared back. And what was their reply? Did they understand the honor of their impending sacrifice? The sarcasm in his tone was as sharp as his claws. "They accepted the task," Vorlag said slowly, his own internal processors struggling to reconcile the information. "They did not ask for reinforcements. They did not request compensation or political favor. They downloaded all available data on the Cipher 8, stated they would handle the situation, and then severed the diplomatic channel." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of dread, but of profound, galaxy-spanning confusion. "Handle it," Xylos repeated, the words dripping with disbelief. "A single, outdated ship against a reality-consuming entity? Are they insane? Or is this some kind of primitive, ritualistic suicide?" "Perhaps they define outdated differently than we do," the Glypton cipher suggested, its gaseous form swirling with patterns of deep contemplation. "Perhaps our metrics for measuring technological advancement are incomplete." Vorlag felt a strange resonance build within his crystalline structure, an intuition that defied Cathar logic. He had seen the specifications of the Vanguard. It was, by all measures, a piece of junk. It possessed no weapons that could even scratch the hull of a modern Vexian destroyer, let alone affect a paracausal entity. Its power core was a relic, its sublight engines inefficient. And yet, there was a detail in the ship's energy readings, a tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuation that no one else had bothered to analyze. It was a deep, rhythmic hum, a frequency that did not correspond to any known drive system or power source. It was almost biological, like a heartbeat. "Project the live feed from the Typhon expanse onto the main sphere," Vorlag commanded, his voice firm. "We will bear witness. Whatever the outcome, the humans have answered a call that our greatest fleets could not. They have earned that much." The grand holographic sphere shimmered, the cold, analytical data charts dissolving. They were replaced by a stark, real-time image from a deep space observatory drone. The view was of a section of space that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. In the foreground, stars shone with their familiar, steady light. But beyond them, there was a patch of absolute blackness, an amorphous, churning void that was actively unmaking the cosmos around it. It was the Cipher 8, a hole in the universe, its edges roiling with transient, impossible geometries. And moving steadily toward it was a tiny speck of light and metal, the TCS Vanguard. From the Conclave's perspective, it was like watching a microbe approach a supermassive black hole. The sheer difference in scale was absurd. A cosmic joke with a punchline written in annihilation. The ship looked small, helpless, and utterly, hopelessly out of its depth. Its primitive chemical thrusters flared with pathetic bursts of light as it adjusted its trajectory, a stark contrast to the silent, effortless glide of the Conclave's gravitic drives. Xylos made a low, guttural sound of disgust and pity. Even he, a warrior who lived for glorious battle, could find no honor in this. This was not a fight, it was an execution. A communication channel opened, hailing the conclave directly from the human ship. The signal was clear, unencrypted, and carried a startling lack of urgency. Vorlag accepted the connection. On the sphere, a new window opened, showing the bridge of the Vanguard. It was not the gleaming, minimalist command center of a Cathar vessel or the brutalist, weapon-lined deck of a Vexian warship. It was cluttered. Wires were bundled along the ceiling, physical monitors with glowing text sat alongside holographic displays, and the crew members wore simple, practical uniforms. In the center of the view stood a single human female, her hair pulled back severely, her face calm and unlined by fear. Her title appeared below her image, Ambassador Eva Rostova. Grand Conclave, this is Ambassador Rostova of the Terran Confederacy ship Vanguard, she said, her voice a placid alto, utterly devoid of the terror that should have been consuming her. We have reached the designated coordinates. We are beginning our analysis of the entity. Xylos could not contain his incredulity. Analysis, he boomed, his voice echoing in the chamber. Human, your ship will be unmade in moments. Your only course of action is to turn and flee. We will not fault you for it. Ambassador Rostova's gaze shifted slightly, as if she were looking directly at the arch-strategist across the light years of empty space. Her expression did not change. That is not an option, arch-strategist. The entity is on a direct vector toward inhabited systems. Withdrawal is not a strategically or ethically viable solution. The calm, rational pronouncement was more shocking to Xylos than any scream of panic would have been. It was the logic of a warrior, but it was coming from a being he considered little more than a clever animal, commanding a ship he considered a coffin. Vorlag leaned forward, his crystalline form chiming softly. Ambassador, what is your intention? Your vessel's capabilities are known to us. You possess no weaponry that can interact with this phenomenon. Your understanding of our capabilities is based on incomplete data, High Luminary, Rostova replied, her tone still perfectly level. It was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. The Vanguard is equipped for this specific type of contingency. Please stand by. We are about to deploy our primary instrument. The chamber watched, a collection of the most powerful beings in the galaxy held captive by the actions of a single primitive ship. On the main display, the Vanguard came to a full stop, its thrusters falling silent. It drifted, a mote of dust before the all-consuming storm of the Cypher 8. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The human ship just sat there, its low-energy signature barely registering. The Cypher 8 continued its silent, relentless expansion, its chaotic edges now just a short distance from the vessel. What are they doing? Xylos hissed, his frustration mounting. This is madness, they are baiting it. They are listening, the Glypton Cypher's thoughts whispered through the chamber. Or, feeling, they are not observing its physical properties, they are observing its nature. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Rostova watched her own set of displays, which showed information that would have been meaningless to the conclave. There were no energy readings, no mass spectrometry. Instead, there were waveforms of pure concept, charts of existential resonance, and metrics for causal stability. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. We have a coherent conceptual lock, she said to her crew. The entity's foundational premise is recursive negation, simple but aggressive. She then looked back toward her comms pickup. Grand Conclave, you may wish to recalibrate your long-range sensors. What you are about to witness may generate anomalous readings. Vorlag felt a premonition, a deep thrumming in the core of his crystalline being. He gave the order, and across the galaxy, Conclave sensor arrays shifted their focus, preparing to record the final, fleeting moments of the human ship. The Vanguard did not fire a weapon. It did not raise a shield. Instead, a series of panels slid open along its strange, asymmetrical hull, revealing not weapon ports but something else entirely. They were arrays of what looked like massive, intricately tuned metallic forks, humming with an energy that was not electromagnetic, not gravitational, not anything on the known spectrum. A low, profound hum began to emanate from the ship, a sound that seemed to travel not through space, but through the mind of anyone observing it. It was the sound Vorlag had detected earlier, the ship's heartbeat, now amplified into a deep, resonant tone. The tone built a single, pure note of unimaginable clarity. It was a note that spoke of order, of logic, of a singular, unshakable truth. It was the antithesis of the chaotic, meaningless noise of the Cypher 8. The human ship had ceased to be a machine of metal and wire. It had become an instrument, and it was playing the song of existence itself. And then it unleashed its power. It was not a beam of light. It was not a wave of energy. It was a pulse of silence, a wave of absolute perfect stillness that expanded outward from the vanguard in a perfect sphere. It was not the absence of sound, but the absence of everything. As the wave washed over the roiling, chaotic edge of the Cypher 8, the impossible happened. The Cypher 8 did not explode. It did not dissipate or shrink. It simply stopped being there. Where the wave of stillness passed, the churning void of the entity was replaced by clean, pristine, empty space. Stars that had been devoured winked back into existence, their light traveling across the void as if nothing had ever obstructed it. The cancerous wound in reality was not healed. It was erased, as if a scribe had taken a cloth to a flawed manuscript and wiped the ink clean before it could even dry. The wave expanded, silent and inexorable, and with every passing microsecond, more of the Cypher 8 vanished. It was not destruction. It was a universal correction, a cosmic negation of a negation. In the grand conclave chamber, there was a silence so profound it felt like the end of the universe. Xylos was frozen, his mighty mandibles hanging open, his multifaceted eyes wide with an emotion his species had never evolved to process. Awe! The Glypton cipher's gaseous form had ceased swirling, becoming a perfect, placid sphere. Vorlag felt as if his entire crystalline structure was vibrating in sympathy with the note the human ship had produced, a resonance that shook the foundations of his millennia-old understanding of the cosmos. They watched as the wave of stillness completely passed through the volume of space the Cypher 8 had occupied. In less than a minute, the entity was gone, not defeated, not repelled, gone. The Typhon expanse was whole again. The sensors that Rostova had warned them about were now screaming, not with data, but with the lack of it. They reported a perfect, localized causal vacuum. An event had occurred that had left no evidence of its own occurrence. It was a paradox that logic could not contain. The view on the holographic sphere was now of the lone human ship, the TCS Vanguard, floating serenely in a now pacified region of space. Its tuning fork-like arrays retracted, the strange hum faded, and its energy signature returned to its previous, deceptively low level. It looked once again like an outdated, harmless vessel, a museum piece. The communication channel from the Vanguard was still open. Ambassador Rostova's face was as calm as it had been before. She had not moved. There was no triumph in her eyes, no relief. There was only a quiet, solemn sense of a task completed. "Grand Conclave," she said, her voice gently breaking the spell of stunned silence. "The anomalous existential threat has been neutralized. The Typhon expanse is clear. We are transmitting our final report." It took a long time for anyone in the chamber to find their voice. It was Xylos, the hardened warrior, the proud arch-strategist, who spoke first. His voice was a choked, rasping whisper, stripped of all its former arrogance. What was that? What kind of weapon creates nothing? What power did we just witness?" Rostova's expression softened for the first time, a subtle shift that might have been mistaken for pity. "It was not a weapon, arch-strategist. Weapons destroy. They create entropy, chaos, debris. They leave scars. The Vanguard is not a warship. It is a regulator. It does not destroy. It clarifies." Vorlag found his voice, the chimes resonating with a new, profound humility. You erased it from ever having existed in that space. Our archives are already correcting themselves. The records of our lost fleets, they are flickering. The memories of their loss are becoming dreamlike. You did not just remove the threat, you removed the damage. "Causality is more malleable than most species believe," Rostova explained simply. "Our ancestors learned that lesson at great cost. We discovered that the ultimate power in the universe is not the ability to create or destroy, but the ability to define what is real. The Cypher 8 was a flawed premise, an argument against existence. We simply presented a more compelling counterargument." The philosophical depth of her statement was staggering. The Conclave had built empires on the mastery of matter and energy. Humans, this young, chaotic species, had evidently transcended that. They were not manipulating physics. They were manipulating the very axioms upon which physics was built. The Vanguard, the ship they had called outdated, was not a product of primitive technology. It was the product of a technology so advanced, so fundamentally different, that the Conclave had lacked the conceptual framework to even recognize it. It was not pre-gravitic, it was post-physical. Your ship, the Glypton cipher's thoughts flowed, now tinged with a deep reverence. It appears old to us. Its design is utilitarian, lacking the energy fields we associate with power. Why? Rostova gave a small, sad smile. Because power that advertises itself is a temptation. Our history taught us that. We nearly annihilated ourselves with weapons that shattered reality. We fought wars that left wounds in space-time itself. When we survived, when we finally learned, we made a choice. We chose to be quiet. We chose restraint. Our most profound technologies are designed to be overlooked. The Vanguard looks old because the wisdom it carries is ancient. It is a promise we made to ourselves, to never again mistake the ability to unmake the universe for the right to do so. It is a tool, not of conquest, but of stewardship. The chamber fell into another long silence as the weight of this revelation settled upon the delegates. Humanity was not young. They were old, impossibly old in experience if not in years. They were a species that had passed through a fire that would have consumed any of the Conclave's worlds, and they had emerged on the other side, quieter, calmer, and wielding a power that made the might of armadas seem like the squabbles of children. Their outdated ships were a deliberate choice, a cultural and philosophical statement. They had walked to the brink of godhood and had chosen to be mortal. Vorlag felt the foundations of his worldview crumble, and in their place, a new understanding began to crystallize. He had seen the humans as unpredictable. He now saw them as disciplined. He had seen them as illogical. He now saw them as operating with an ethical calculus so advanced it was beyond his comprehension. He had underestimated them, and in doing so, he had underestimated the very nature of the universe. Ambassador Rostova, Vorlag said, his voice imbued with a respect that no Cathar had ever offered to another species. The Grand Conclave, we are in your debt. What you have done here today has saved countless lives and preserved the integrity of this galaxy. We were arrogant. We were blind. We ask now not as superiors, but as equals for your counsel, for your aid in understanding what has transpired. Xylos, the Vexian warrior, bowed his head in a gesture of profound submission. It was an act so contrary to his species, nature, that it sent a visible shock through the chamber. We have measured strength by the fire we can command, he rasped. You have shown us that true strength is the wisdom to know when not to burn. The Vexian hive offers its allegiance to the Terran Confederacy. We will learn from you. The human ambassador simply nodded, accepting their words with a quiet grace that was more powerful than any declaration of victory. Unity will be essential. Understanding is the first step. She paused, and her calm demeanor shifted. For the first time, a flicker of something grave, something cold, entered her eyes. The atmosphere on the bridge behind her seemed to change, the quiet professionalism replaced by a silent, focused urgency. I must be clear, high luminary members of the Conclave, she continued, her voice losing its placid quality and taking on a new, solemn weight. What we just faced, the Cipher 8, it was not a random anomaly. It was not a natural disaster. Vorlag's facets dimmed. What was it, Ambassador? Our analysis, conducted as we calibrated our instrument, was not just of the entity's nature, but of its origin, Rostova said. A paracausal phenomenon like that does not simply arise from nothing. It is engineered. It is deployed. The Cipher 8 was a weapon, but it was more than that. It was simple, crude in its design, almost like a range-finding shot. A cold dread, far deeper and more real than the fear the Cipher 8 had inspired, began to seep into the ancient chamber. The Cipher 8, the reality-devouring horror that had brought the galaxy to its knees, was crude. It was a probe, Rostova stated, her words hitting with the force of a physical blow. A scout. It was designed to test the defensive capabilities of this galactic region. Its chaotic, all-consuming nature was meant to overwhelm conventional responses, to gauge the upper limits of physical and energetic resistance. Xylos looked up, his mandibles trembling. A probe from who or what? Rostova's gaze became distant, looking at something far beyond the confines of her ship or the holographic display. When the Vanguard erased the entity, T did more than just nullify its existence. The process of unmaking it allowed us to trace its causal chain, to follow the thread of its purpose back to its source. That source is not within our galaxy. It comes from the intergalactic void, from the darkness between the great islands of stars. She gestured to an officer off-screen. The main holographic sphere in the conclave chamber changed once more. The image of the Vanguard was replaced by a cosmological map of their local galactic group. Their own spiral galaxy was a swirl of brilliant light. But there, in the immense empty space between their galaxy and the next, was something new. It was a shadow, a vast, moving patch of utter blackness, far larger than any nebula, far more absolute than any dust cloud. It was a region of space where distant galaxies, which should have been visible, were simply gone, their light blotted out. It was not an object, it was an absence, and it was moving. "We do not know what they are," Rostova said, her voice now a near whisper, heavy with the burden of this knowledge. "We have no name for them, but they are coming. They are crossing the great void. The Cipher 8 was their herald, a single primitive tool to see if this galaxy was ripe for harvesting. What we just faced was the equivalent of them throwing a stone. The force behind that stone is now on its way." The Grand Conclave Chamber, the heart of power for a dozen elder races, the seat of empires that had lasted for millions of years, was utterly silent. The mighty fleets, the unbreakable logic, the ancient wisdom, all of it felt like dust in the face of the immense, cold truth now displayed before them. They had spent their history squabbling over territory, debating philosophy, and measuring their strength against one another, all while a threat of unimaginable scale was approaching, silent and unseen. Vorlag stared at the encroaching darkness on the map, then back at the calm, somber face of the human ambassador. He finally understood the true nature of humanity's quietness, their restraint. It was not born of weakness or passivity. It was the solemn discipline of a sentry, a watchman who had seen a greater darkness and had spent generations preparing for it. Their outdated ships were not relics of the past, but tools forged for a future the rest of the galaxy had not even known to fear. "You knew," Vorlag chimed, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical impact. "Your species, you knew of this threat. This is why you developed such technology. You were not preparing for wars with us. You were preparing for this." "We have seen signs for a long time," Rostova confirmed, her eyes filled with an ancient weariness. "Faint signals from the void, distant galaxies that seem to dim for no reason. Our most advanced listening posts, hidden in the space between galaxies, have been monitoring the approaching silence. The Cipher 8 was merely the first definitive proof that it had arrived at our doorstep." The scale of the revelation was too vast to process. Xylos, the Vexian, looked not at the map but at the image of the vanguard. The small, unassuming ship, the ship they called outdated. It was not a weapon of war. It was a surgeon's scalpel, a scholar's pen, a watchman's lantern in an infinite night. And it was the only thing that had stood between their galaxy and the vanguard of that all-consuming darkness. A new unity was being forged in that chamber, born not of treaties or diplomacy, but of a shared existential terror. The old rivalries, the ancient prides, they all seemed like fading echoes in the face of the great, silent enemy. High Luminary Vorlag looked at the human, then at the Vexian, then felt the harmonizing thoughts of the Glypton cipher fill the chamber, no longer cryptic, but clear, resolute. He saw the future, not as a continuation of their glorious history, but as a desperate struggle for survival. And at the center of that struggle stood the quiet newcomers, the keepers of impossible secrets and sorrowful wisdom, the species that had learned the hard way that the greatest battles are not fought with noise and fire, but with stillness, resolve, and a ship that looked like it belonged to the past, but was, in fact, the only key to a future. "Ambassador Rostova," Vorlag said, his voice a clear, resonant chime that echoed with the weight of a new and terrible purpose. "The Grand Conclave stands with you. The age of our empires is over. The age of our survival has begun. Tell us what we need to do." On the bridge of the vanguard, Eva Rostova gave a slow, determined nod. The fight for the galaxy had just begun.